we are live from Cres, broadcasting to the world, and maybe further. Okay. Well, thank you. We are in former Austro-Hungarian land, so the akademische Viertel, I think, is allowed. This is not Anglo-Saxon territory, so yeah. You mean Austro-Hungary was an empire? Yes, it was. Absolutely. Okay, so we have two, sorry? We have two great panels with two of our this year's fellows. The first will be Oksana. We're very happy to have you here, Oksana. The chair will be Luke Cooper, and I will hand it over to him straight away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. As you know, as some of you know, I'm Luke from the LSE, where I work with the LSE Ideas Conflict Research Program, and we have a new program on Ukraine that I've been coordinating. So I'm really pleased to be chairing this session. We're going to be hearing first from Oksana Forostyna, talking about Ukraine on the European path and its adversaries. Oksana is going to talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we're going to have some discussions and questions from Grigorij and Wojciech. So Oksana, please take us away.
I will need this. So I apologize for the title. I know it's a cliche, but in this particular case, it's an attempted joke. I hope later you will understand why it's so. And if you don't mind, I will need a timer because I'm not good with this. Okay. My topic is actually more about domestic Ukrainian politics. A bit far from what we were discussing yesterday, but again, at the end, we will come to it. We will come to the question of European integration, and I hope I can explain why it's all connected, or I hope so. So, as you may know, the world political landscape in Ukraine, for the obvious reasons, changed dramatically. And what we can say for sure for this moment, even with taking into account that the society is obviously in shock, and maybe some reactions are too extreme, maybe it will change. But again, I think that in this particular case, the Ukrainian attitude towards Russia changed for good. Again, that's both the result of the war and it's in sync with the previous trend. So if you look at the numbers, you'll see that the first decline was after annexation of Crimea and the beginning of war in Donbass in 2014. So 2015 is the number before revolution. So that's still Yanukovych is still in office. Maidan did not happen yet. So that's where we were. So most Ukrainians were positive or mostly positive towards Russia. Now you have this number, totally negative attitude. That's 2013. Most of Ukrainians. So, and if you look at these numbers, you may say, okay, why are we talking about this? So it's all over. So nothing to talk about. And that's the next thing. You know, I don't think we will have election in the nearest future. Again, for the obvious reasons. Just technically, it's impossible. It's very hard to imagine how it may happen. in the near future. But when the researchers asked, that's NDI research, the attitude of Ukrainians, I'm sorry that's in Ukrainian, attitude of Ukrainians towards political parties, which are now in Rada, in parliament. The last line you see that the pro-Russian, the biggest pro-Russian party, opposition platform for life, and they have 65, that's negative rating, only 6% of approval. And the first line is servant of the people, which is the president party. So that's again what happened to pro-Russian sentiments in Ukraine after the invasion. In the last year, July 2022, that's how people explained their preferences in media consuming. And 73% consider that pro-Russian media should be restricted in some way. But that's why are we talking about this? Because there is a gap, it's not big, but there is a gap between people who trust Russian media and who watch actually Russian media. And the trend is that people may stick to their previous media menu. They may still watch Russian media, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they trust them. And that's the next slide. Again, I'm sorry, some of them in Ukrainian. So see that this 77% red line that explain that people they use Russian resources, they read or watch Russian media, but at the same time they support the idea that there are too many pro-Russian media in Ukraine and the state should restrict it in some way. So it's not that, it's not that linear that if you watch Russian media you necessarily, what's going on? That it doesn't mean that you necessarily trust them. Some people just watch it to understand what's going on and have what they consider the balanced view. So that's a quote I liked very much. And that's from my colleague Yevhen Glibovitsky had very interesting panel in Davos this January, and he said that Ukraine has been probably one of the most misinterpreted countries in the world. And I think that we should, when we start to talk about this, I think we should begin to the very categories, how we described all that, because I started with explaining this Russian attitude and people's preference, but on the daily basis we operate with terms like pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian, and we rarely think what it actually means. And I think that I will come to this a bit later. I will come back how that started, why we have these categories, why we have this discussion and on the normal basis, on the daily basis every day. So when Ukraine had the referendum in December 1991, absolutely most of Ukrainians voted for country independence. Only 8% voted against it, and 84% attended and voted. But just several months before that, more than 70% voted for the opposite. they voted for Soviet Union to reinvent itself in this new Union Treaty. It was in March 1991. So only you see 28% voted against it, and it was a bit complicated back then because, for example, Western regions had additional questions during this thing. So what happened between these two things? One thing is coup in Moscow. That's we know. In August 1991, coup in Moscow, and after that, 24th of August, Ukraine declared independence. So that's basically the trend that repeated in that or that form later. For beginning with the referendum, researchers every year constantly checked this result, basically. From 20 to 22 to last year, and I think they will do it this year as well, Razumkov Center, Ukrainian think tank, asked exactly the same question. If the referendum would be this Sunday, how would you vote? And I don't know how normal it sounds to you, because even we in Ukraine, we had, this minor discussion. Is it even normal that we, after 20 years and 30 years, ask people, what do you think? Is it really a good idea to be independent? Nevertheless, so the latest result from the previous year was 37% support. That's the highest. And I will show in the next slide the result from the 90s, from the previous years. It will be a little difference because the methodology is different. So in this case, this is a result of 3 accumulated questions, but at the end they explained these figures as the support for independence. Again, I'm sorry that's in Ukrainian, but you can see the dynamics. And what we can tell from this, that every time there is an existential threat or something that happened in Russia, for example, this is the first time this line goes up again after the depression of 90s is the war in Chechnya. The first Chechen war and the second Chechen war, and you can see it. 2000, this again. 2003, that's in the middle, this, sharp rising. That's the minor conflict Russia had with Ukraine over the island Tuzla in Black Sea. That was 2003. So, and then again, in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. Again, we had this rising in Ukraine, and the end of the line is the annexation of Crimea. And now it's even higher. This line is even higher. That's so. That's what I was. That's another understanding thing. That's what we discussed is the threats. So every time people feel that there is but it might be some security issues, the support for the independence rose. But another trend is that, for example, we had this raising support in 2010, thanks to the east and the south of the country. And what happened in 2010? Yanukovych was elected. Yanukovych came to office. So the reaction of this region, which mostly voted for him, okay, our guy in the office, so it's fine now. So we can support this country. So that's again some kind of alienation that goes back and forth, dependence how do you see to which extent you own this country? I think the usual, maybe you heard about, had or read about that the support of Ukrainian independence correlates with age, educated incomes. The higher, the better the education, the higher the education, the more chances that a person support independence. The younger people usually support independence more, and this group who are poorer, older, felt worse about themselves, they don't tend to support it. So that's from 2001 to 2020. So Zelensky is already in the office at this moment. He came in 2018, and you see, again, Zelensky came to office, and this the support went up. Again, because people felt that that's their country. So that was the context in which this term pro-Russian could actually appear, because as you see, the Ukrainian independence and the future of Ukraine was not something we had for granted, something what was normal from the very beginning. So that was the extent, the form of this independence. Do we have any kind of union with Russia and Belarus? Yeah, that's what we call pro-Russian attitude. That's what we call pro-Russian sentiment. Or do we join NATO? Again, that's considered to be anti-Russian, mostly. Another interesting thing that every year during every survey and every election, what we could say that there are a lot of people, at least 20% accumulated with those who are not really sure, who wanted both. So they were asked, do you want to join Russia and Belarus in some form? Yes. Do you want to join European Union? Yes. Do you want market economy? Yes. Do you want regulated prices? Yes. So they wanted contradictory things. Well, that's, as far as I know, that's a normal reaction of a society in transition, in stress. But in Ukraine, that was problematic because that was too long and for too substantial part of the population. And again, what we can explain as pro-Russian. Because I think that these terms are important. The first pro-Russian president was Leonid Kuchma. He was elected in 1994. That was very challenging times for Ukraine, severe economic situation, severe inflation, and he comes from the social group that can be described as Red Directors. So that was old Soviet industrial elites. And what he promised during his campaign was official status for Russian language, the ties with Moscow, economical ties with Moscow. So the things that could address this more conservative part of the population. And already already in the next election in 1999, because he stayed 2 terms in the office, he explained his foreign policy as pro-Ukrainian, which means, in his terms, that we do not play with Russia, we do not play with West, we have our own way, whatever that means. But actually, that means that we will play both. Well, in 2003, Kuchma wrote a book with revealing title, Ukraine is not Russia. What is important about him, that Kuchma built the system, apart from his rhetoric, you know, he built the system in which oligarchs could own the country, but none of them had monopoly. And he was sitting like a spider in the middle of them, and he could play them all. But he also empowered them. He let them have their money and their power. And the side effect of that was that Ukraine became independent economical de facto because oligarchs enjoyed their status, of course, and they didn't want to share the status with Russia. So that was a kind of, again, gaining economical independence from Russia. So he mastered this balance personally, and it worked until 2004, until Orange Revolution, as soon as he was in office. And what was going on inside the country is a black mistake. I can talk about it later because we are almost running out of time. I have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. So that's again. He was pro-Russian at the beginning. His rhetoric was pro-Russian, but as soon as he came to office, what he did was actually deep integration Ukraine into a Western institution, the cooperation with NATO. So what he did, what he said was a little bit different. Again, I will skip it now for the case of time. And again, what we can describe as pro-Russian party. The problem with it that there are a lot of them, and there is a bright spectrum from absolutely crazy Russian chauvinists who deny Ukrainian identity, deny Ukrainian language, and so forth. They never had major support. They usually had their few percents, and that was all. That was quite radical. Pro-Russian parties was also Communist Party. We considered them because Communist parties and Socialist Party, you shouldn't be deluded with names, because titles don't matter in this case. Communist Party their foreign policy was very determined to have some kind of union with Russia and with Belarus. So Social Democratic Party United, that was one of the unpopular but still important, because that was the party of Viktor Medvedchuk. You may know about him. He is the cum of Vladimir Putin, actually de facto Vladimir Putin representative in Ukraine. So, but my point is that these old parties, who mostly addresses paternalistic, conservative, poor people, and represented themselves as pragmatics, this kind of, guys who can solve the problems and provide them with social welfare and have these economic ties with Russia. They are losing their base, partly for natural reasons, because I'm sorry, old people die. So that's one thing. And young people are not very attracted by the idea. Another thing is, again, this shock that we had in 2014, the annexations of Crimea and the war. And so I would say, again, for the sake of time, I would say that in this form, they are history. You cannot sell the same message, you cannot sell the same ideology again, because you have maybe few percent for that, and it's shrinking every day. But it doesn't really matter that they are over. First of all, despite the so-called ban, because that's a legislation which is problematic and will be discussed, most of them, those who didn't leave the country for Russia or for Spain after the invasion, or those who didn't openly collaborated, and again, which they're traitors de facto. Some of them are still in parliament, so the party is banned, but they're in parliament. For example, Nestor Shufrich, who is infamous pro-Russian politician with the career of 20-something. Yes, he's still the head of Rada Committee for Free Speech. And why it's happened? That's happened because their words are needed. And their words are needed mostly for, again, very ambiguous bills, like, for example, bill for losing the construction security norms, which is very beneficial for developers. So the legislation which is loaded with corruption risk, I would put it kindly like that. So they behave, I would describe it like this. So again, my friends, so what is my point? And again, my colleague Yevhen Glebovitsky, he has much better wording about this. He put it better. So this pro-Russian core is shrinking, yeah, but it's not disappearing. And mind again that when Zelensky party, servant of the people, won the election brilliantly in 2019 with a great support. This party does not have some, some real ideology. There are people from different views. They are from vocally pro-European to vocally pro-Russian. You know, very different, diverse crowd, I would describe it again like this. So what may happen, at some point, there will be some groups of people in Ukraine that will be dissatisfied with European integration. They may lose something from that, obviously, and you guys know about that, how it actually happens. And they can unite with this old pro-Russian core, this small core, and they can be empowered by capitals, by businesses in Ukraine, which again may lose something from European integration, you know, because they will not be satisfied with the terms or something. They may lose something. And their common interests will be to confront Brussels and to prevent further European integration of Ukraine. I don't know at what point that may happen, but it may happen actually any time when we discuss it. So the difference between this old pro-Russian party and the new pro-Russian party is that the older guys, the former guys, they depended on Moscow. You know how many photos they will do with Putin, how kind he would be to them. This new possible alliance depends on how many failures Brussels may do. So because every failure, every disappointment of European integration will enforce these new movements. So that's I wouldn't focus on some persons, because again we don't know we can't predict now who may be like the leader of the new movement, but that's just an example how that may work. And the messages, the ideas behind this possible new movement was shaped before the invasion. That's important. That before the invasion, we already had these new ideas presented, discussed, and it may sounds like something crazy, you know, like on the edge of esoteric. But if you look at how popular it is on YouTube, if you look how many business people are open to these ideas, because that was not, you know, the meeting with some people who has nothing else to do but to discuss politics. That was meetings with businesses, with people who may decide something in that, who may influence something. So, for example, one of the promoters of this new idea of Ukraine, which is not pro-Russian. Okay, we are not going there, but we also should have our own way, not necessarily with Europe, because Europe is declining. You know, it's at the end of the West, at the end of democracy. We should look into Singapore, into Turkey, because that's a new power, and we should go approximately this way. We have this, you know, unique destiny. Okay, again, that sounds crazy, but at the same time, if you frame it in the right moment, especially when we have what can be described as the disappointed winners or offended winners after the war, that may work. And I could tell more about it, but Luke looks at me not kind. Okay, so I must stop now, but I will try to explain more if I have a possibility.
Thank you, Luke. I will be next. Yeah, thank you very much, Oksana, for this really brilliant presentation, which is giving us the picture which shows that the process of development and consolidation of Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian political nation was really interesting and complicated, and just I would like to stress this aspect of your presentation. So my comment will be divided into two parts. The first, it will be lengthy but not very long remark about process of consolidation of Ukrainian modern political nation and Ukrainian statehood. And in the second part, I will quote from one very fresh public opinion poll conducted by International Republican Institute in Ukraine. And there are some things which are relevant for our topic. So after Russian invasion, we are witnessing how some analysts, experts are ascribing to Vladimir Putin the role of the father of the modern Ukrainian nation. I mean, as a metaphor, it's attractive, but I think reality is absolutely different. So I wouldn't ascribe any merit to this criminal for this. It's true that after the invasion, I mean, the feeling of belonging to Ukrainian state among the population cemented, but the process of development and consolidation of Ukrainian political nation and Ukrainian statehood started immediately after creation of Ukrainian independent state, republic. So you quoted results of the referendum. It was absolutely clear that majority of population was okay with the fact that Ukraine is emerging as an independent state, and I'm very glad that you mentioned, and it's now one of the factors that despite the oligarchic system, this pluralism persisted. So it was really still maybe not always very functional, maybe in some periods even defective, but it was democracy. It was democracy, it was a competition between political actors, it was pluralism in politics, party politics, despite the fact that these parties were rather, associations of different interests, non-identical, but it was important. Then media sphere, also pluralism. So it means that Ukrainians lived 30 years in conditions of the problematic, as I said, sometimes maybe defective. I think during Yanukovych's rule, democracy really showed some defective elements. But it was democracy. And people, of course, had a feeling that they are also participating in this process and their decisions really matter. So, from my personal experience, I was visiting quite frequently Ukraine in the previous years. We had and still we have a good partner in Ukraine. It's Democratic Initiative Foundation, which is a think tank, who is conducting opinion polls. I visited many times the eastern part of Ukraine, and from my personal experience in communication with those people with geopolitical illusions about possibility of creation of kind of special arrangement and relations between Russia and Ukraine, maybe some custom union, something like this, and people with the preferences of Russian culture and strengthening the ties with Russia. But even this group of population, they wasn't for being a part of Russia. They wanted to live in different Ukraine, but they were somehow identified with Ukraine as a state, so that Ukraine should persist as an independent, separate state. I think it was very important. It was very important, and today we see how those parts of the population, which I guess in the previous years they had these geopolitical illusions, and they preferred the cultural closeness over the universal values, let's say, or maybe basic elements of foreign policy orientation, but today they are definitely against Russia. Many of them are fighting against Russia as a soldiers, the military. So I think that it's very important to understand, and I agree with you or with your colleague Evgen Hlibovitsky that Ukraine was really the most misinterpreted state in the world many years, and the whole this legend about division, strict division between east, the west, central part, south. So yeah, there were some divisions in attitude to different trends, different events, maybe some value orientations, but it wasn't division in the main issue that Ukrainian state should exist, should continue its existence. So now back to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, I mean, there are analyses how Vladimir Putin was speaking about Ukraine since he became a president, and he was quite frequently speaking about Ukraine, and always he was speaking in the terms of Ukraine's relation with Russia. Common cultural heritage, linguistic heritage, confessional, I mean ties between Ukraine and Russia, cooperation between Ukraine and Russia. Never other factors appeared in his speeches. Yeah? Now we know that really he hated Ukraine. He didn't want Ukraine to exist, but when conditions were not appropriate for open military invasion, he just indicated that, I mean, that Ukraine should be kind of common arrangement with Russia. One word exists in the Russian language, Votchina, which is inherited real estate. And Putin treated Ukraine as a kind of Votchina which was temporarily disconnected from his own belongings. And so it was quite clear that Putin would do everything to have big influence, Russia's big influence to Ukraine. He wanted to transform Ukraine from normal state to the failing state. non-sustainable state. And when he was persuaded that Ukraine is succeeded, that Ukraine, I mean, his plans to modify Ukraine in the failing state, he decided to invite, I think. Now, let me, I don't have time to show you, but just to quote comments of some fresh results of opinion poll. It was conducted by Center for Insight in Survey Research. It's a project of International Republican Institute. And what are the main conclusions from this? Very encouraging, by the way, from this opinion poll. It was conducted in March, and the result presented in March, and there is some comparison with the previous 3 opinion polls conducted by the same institution. So, high social optimism, belief in victory of Ukraine sustains, and high expectations of preserving the territorial integrity of Ukrainian state as a result of the war. Now, it's technically, so how do you see the future of Ukraine was a question, yeah? And it's still very high optimism, rather promising 93%. 93% of Ukrainians in February 2023 believe, I mean, also express these optimistic views. In April 2022, so shortly after the invasion, it was 95, now 93. And there are no big differences between inhabitants of the east, west, the central or southern part, different age cohorts. I mean, it's very homogeneous opinion. Do you believe that Ukraine will win the war? 82% believe definitely yes, 82, and 15 that likely yes. So it means that again, it's almost 100% of people account with the possibility that Ukraine will win the war. Quicker? Oh. It's okay. Then maybe some select data. Of course, I mean, I don't want to to present you the very positive rosy. I mean, the rosy situation. Of course, I mean, Ukraine is a state in the war, and of course there are problems, economic problems, migration. I mean, terrible situation in some areas, which are every day bombarded by Russian aggressors. Interesting thing is that support for Ukrainian participation in either EU integration or transatlantic partnership is high. It's even, I mean, from my point of view, improved. After the invasion, 59% supported the idea that Ukraine would be part of NATO. Today it's 82%, so the hopes are rising. Membership in the European Union from 80% a year ago to 85% now. Concerning the trust to institutions, the most trustworthy institution is Ukrainian army. President Zelensky, also the second most trustworthy institution, only 2 are higher than 50%. Army and Zelensky, but in case of Zelensky, quite considerable drop in his popularity occurred. So since 74% after the invasion to 58% today. So I have another lot of another interesting findings. Maybe some of them I will quote in discussion. Sorry? Yes, I can share. Yes, I can share. I can send or. So I decided not to, I mean, to overburden you by these, I mean, slides, but it's very interesting. Okay.
All right. I'll try to bring it to 4 points essentially. And thanks, Oksana, for getting into this politics of emotions and imagination of Ukrainians. I think it's really important. It reminds me of the argument Dominique Moisy once made on the geopolitics of emotion. In contrast, he was basically opposing the narrative of Huntington. And also, Grisha, your data also suggests that Ukraine is actually what Europe needs. Dominique Moisy argument was saying that there are three types, essentially, of division in the world. The nations that are thinking forward, kind of they're optimistic about their future, that the future will bring a better life than today. Generally, this emotion is widely distributed in the Southeast Asia. While the second big emotion in the world, he attributed mostly to the Western countries, is the emotion of fear. As good, so the times are as good as it gets today. So we are defensive, we're fearful of the future, but we're also not looking back to the past that much, which supposedly represents a liberal mindset of Europe of today. And the type of those who believe that the best times in history used to be, and that has dominated and then builds a very dangerous positions. Essentially, it's about revisionism and seeking revenge on the world based on that. So these emotions that Ukraine brings to the picture for Europe are one of the big arguments, next to many others, why it's impossible to think about Ukraine integration on one hand, it's impossible not to think about Ukraine integration in the EU on the other hand, which is essentially, I'm quoting Ivan Krastev from whatever other conversation we had. So that's overall on a positive path. Then all you said about the potential of disruption in the Ukrainian society is something I fully kind of support looking into that as a serious scenario. In the paper that was my conclusion, we had several scenarios discussed, and one of them is be careful what the EU wish for. And this scenario basically foretells a story in which Europe democratizes itself in its institutions, institutional, especially the role of the European Parliament. The politics of Europe depends more and more on demos, and with that demos, we inject 36 million of Ukrainians, quite a strong power of vote, of shaping the European future altogether, with a lot of traumas and also a lot of influence that can be the dark influence. And that's a serious thing to consider, that actually says be very careful about institutional reforms and all the discussions we're having, how to change in practical terms, how to change the future of EU. That also gives it's a little bit caricature or cartoonesque because quotes. I'm gonna now quote from Radek Sikorski when we talked about the future of enlargement, how it should go. Well, he suggested, and it's off the is it on the record or? So in my own words, you could, right? Yeah. But the interesting thing is how you actually have a very slight kind of a moment in which you can decide on this progress of Ukraine's path to integration. And this moment probably should consist also of the ability of Ukrainians to give up all their nitty-gritty negotiations whenever they can and just pass forward whenever the option for negotiation opens. So don't, Ukraine probably should not negotiate anything, just jump on board as quick as it can, accept the deals as they are. It's worth considering not as a serious comment, but as a possibility that currently is a window of opportunity for Ukraine, still open, but will be shut down. And here is my last point, that the opposition to Ukraine path to Europe is in all unexpected places, including Poland. The more we will consider and talk about Ukraine integration, the more we will have of to deal with people who will start to look at the nitty-gritty. And in Poland, despite this obvious support of the population because of the security situation, because of the refugees, because of every dimension of what's going on, we have issues that go not in the government itself, but also in the opposition, on the question of our relationship between the two nations, that relates between Poland and Ukraine, that I believe can be managed and can be done properly, but currently there is no time to deal with them. And they are instead, and these are difficult historical issues, minor issues we believed in the past. I think Jarosław Hrycak also believed that it's all solved. These are the 80 years old, some local massacres of population. But they still bounce back, and there is no time right now to deal with them properly. And we will see actually this summer how it is dealt on behalf of the two presidents. But they will resonate, and these difficult paths will haunt us. That's on one side. And there is so much more effort also needed that I see from the Ukrainian side, some of the think tanks or even MFA, to invest in in the neighborhood relationship. Because the Ukrainian path to Europe will need to be also through the neighborhood relations. That also involves Hungary, that also will involve to some extent Belarus, and of course it will involve to some extent something that Balázs yesterday also was mentioning, settlement with Russia in the past. But it's also going to be about, and these are really last points I'm not developing, about all the nitty-gritties that deal with the competitiveness of the economy. For Poland, Ukraine will be a big competitor, not just in terms of agriculture. You'll have already more green energy that Poland has, and that will put Ukraine in a position of leapfrogging many Central European countries, Poland specifically, in supply chains to the new green future of Europe. So just to paint or kind of sketch a challenge ahead.
Thanks, Wojciech. You'll get to comment at the end, just for the sake of time. As I am the moderator, I get to ask the first question. Sorry. So, moderator's privilege. So, Oksana, I was wondering if you could say something in your concluding remarks about how you assess the future of the Ukrainian oligarchy and how that impacts some of the dynamics that you were talking about. I hope that's an opportunity to finish your presentation after I cruelly cut you off. And there's this argument in the political science literature that distinguishes between civil oligarchy and an oligarchic system. So in the West, we have civil oligarchy in the sense that Elon Musk has extraordinary assets that stretch from media to tech and so on. But he doesn't generate wealth through the political system. Political connections are not necessary for him to generate his wealth. So what is the future of the Ukrainian oligarchic system? And the first hand I saw was Tim, and then, yeah. Yeah.
Do you want me to ask my question now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's an elephant in the room, which we need to discuss, but let me get to that in a minute. I mean, I think really when we're talking about Ukraine at the moment, there are three Ukraines. There is the Ukraine which is under the government control, and all the statistics, I assume, come from those areas. Therefore, a lot of the fact that people are kind of consolidated and pro-Russianism is kind of vanishing is not really surprising, since those people have been, bombarded, etc., etc. Then you have the areas which were occupied after February the 24th, in which, in my experience as a journalist, having been in liberated territories, having been in Kherson in November, and having been in parts of Kharkiv, you have people who, presumably before, there were people who were pro-Ukrainian, people who sat in the middle, just with a view of just leave me alone, let me get on with my life, and pro-Russians. Today, in those liberated territories, the pro-Russians either keeping very quiet, or a lot of them have just gone. They've just fled. And then you have the territories which were occupied in 2014-15, where I think the situation is, I imagine, it's extremely different, and pro-Ukrainians, probably there are very few, they probably all left. We don't really know how many there were in the first place. But the question is, like, if we're being optimistic, if we're talking about a future Ukraine where those territories, Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk, are occupied from 2014-15 are liberated, I mean, a lot of those people won't consider themselves liberated because they've been fighting Ukraine and bombarded too, and they will perhaps, or certainly a lot of those people will feel like they are occupied if and when Ukraine comes back, as not unlike the territories occupied and liberated since February the 24th. So really, the question is, for the future polity of a future Ukraine, the real question is, like, pro-Russianism is like, or pro-Russian parties, is this quite a big chunk of population, maybe like 2 million people in Crimea maybe, and maybe 2 million in Donetsk and Lugansk. I mean, what do they think? Have we got any idea what they think? I mean, we don't know how many will remain if and when Ukrainian forces come back, but I think they're the elephant in the room. The pro-Russianism, it's kind of like gone, I think, in all of the rest of Ukraine, but it hasn't gone there. And if we're looking at a future Ukraine in its 1991 borders, they're the people that count when it comes to this question of what happens to pro-Russian sentiment.
Thanks, Tim. We'll go to Thomas next, and then Natalie.
Oksana, thank you. I loved your presentation. Maybe you don't have time for this, but I'm interested generally in the phenomenon that until recently, opinion polls showed a lot of people showing nostalgia for the Soviet Union, but then, in my view, it's never really broken down. In Russia, it's more about a position in which Russia was the great power. We were at the center of things. In the Caucasus, they missed the Soviet Union because it was a time of peace. And I wonder, those who missed the Soviet Union in Ukraine, what they are missing specifically. And something you didn't have time to mention, but I'd be interested in your comment on how big a factor is the Moscow Patriarchate, because clearly it's in decline, but still, clearly it also still has a lot of parishioners in Ukraine. I know that, for example, the mayor of Odessa, who was just fired just after we were there, Trukhanov, he had transformed himself into a Ukrainian patriot, but people also said that he was still a loyal member of the Moscow Patriarchate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oksana. I wanted to come back to this really interesting point that you were making about the new critics. No, it is on. Yeah. The new sort of critics of the West. And so are these former pro-Russians that it just doesn't fly, as Tim was saying, you just can't be pro-Russian anymore, right? So it's basically, it's the same position simply articulated in the new context of war, or are we talking about different people? And if it's the former, or if it's some and some, is this basically similar to, in many respects, what's been happening in Georgia, right? Where, in a sense, you can't really be pro-Russian, and what Georgia represents is kind of basically being pro-Russian without being pro-Russian, and this is articulated in this kind of nationalist, anti-Western, but anti-Western more in the disillusionment sense of the term. So are there some similarities there?
Thank you very much, Oksana. I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit, also in continuation of the conversation on EU potentially building up some frustration if it were to apply the same model of ambiguous openness towards Ukraine, because these attitudes have shifted fast towards a pro-European direction, but as we know, so from social science and so on, they could shift in a different direction quite fast as well when the EU does, you know, what the EU tends to do, which is a cumbersome decision-making process that's actually more likely than not in the future. So my question is rather, what do you think should happen in the short run to make sure we placate that outcome from happening in a way?
Yeah, you said you cannot be pro-Russian anymore, but what I found striking in your data, if you show the first table again, which you started out with, what I found surprising is you could be less anti-Russian after the 2014 invasion, after a couple of years. Between 2014, for the first time in 2014, you had a majority of anti-Russian sentiment, very strongly. But this was withering away within a relatively short period of time, I saw, and I was perplexed by how fast people forget about what has been done to them in 2, 3, 4 years. The second thing is about, what about this, we were all laughing when you presented this 90% for independence in 91 and 70% for the new Union Treaty. What about this basically pragmatical, unreflected, not very thoughtful kind of guts feeling? As an old man, you would say somebody who fixes his trousers by using suspenders and a belt at the same time. So to be on the safe side everywhere, you know, not to lose your... Maybe this is just what people, you know, what about this? I would assume much broader sentiment. It must be going on in some way or the other, even today. But the question, how has it been transformed, or has it been irrevocably destroyed forever after the 22 invasion?
Piotr is the last question, very quickly.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the Venice Commission's report on the national minority law, which is the reform of this law is one of the requirements of the European Union for Ukraine to start the negotiations. And apparently 2 weeks ago the Venice Commission published this report about the national minority law, which was very critical and also evoked some very negative reactions in Ukraine. I wrote a piece in Europejska Pravda which was basically accusing Venice Commission of supporting pro-Russian tendencies in Ukraine. So I would be very interested in your opinion of what's going on actually, and what is at stake here.
Great. So oligarchy, Russian-occupied areas, Soviet nostalgia, the new critics, EU decision-making, pragmatic sentiment, and the Venice Commission. 5 minutes. Good luck.
Okay, I will start with oligarchy, with your question. If you look into the top 20 richest of Ukraine, Forbes rating of the latest, 22, you will see that Rinat Akhmetov, the old oligarch, very well-known name, this guy from the 90s, he's still the first, but the two next are the young guys in T-shirts who own the company called Grammarly, that's IT guys. So, and that, if you go by this list, you will see that there are a lot of these new names from IT, from fintech, from again agriculture. Agriculture is not the guys on tractors. Basically, agriculture is very sophisticated, technically loaded business now. So that's already happening. So I mean that this old oligarchy will be slightly pushed by this new rich people, what you call civil oligarchy. Yes, so that's my answer. That's already happening. So this, I just hope they will not go nuts as Elon Musk. As far as I know, they are saying. So, and that's would bridge me to some comment to Wojciech about the negotiations, and should we really jump and take the first possibility? Honestly, I'm not sure. So we definitely should be on this way. It should be some pace, but maybe it will be kind of, you know, unconventional, but I'm not sure that we should go to the European Union as fast as possible. Maybe it will be more beneficial for Ukraine to take it slower to get the best terms for itself. And another thing is, what is the difference between Ukraine and other Central European countries who entered earlier? They didn't had this landscape of capital. You know, but they didn't have so big guys with their own interest. So that will be a different kind of negotiations. And very shortly again, my comment Wojciech about Poland and Ukraine relations. I know that will not make me new friends in Ukraine, but personally, my opinion that we should do everything possible and take any compromise to have good relations with Poland, whatever that takes. So that's I think that in this particular case, Ukraine should be very, very patient. Maybe sometimes even irrational. Tim, your question on statistic. As I said at the beginning, that all data we have now, I mean, in the middle of the war, should be taken with a pinch of salt. Again, first shock. Second, a lot of people are abroad. We have no access to them, and we don't know what they think. Well, they didn't come back. Liberated territories. And now occupied territories, hopefully liberated in future. Again, we don't know what's going on. There is some point. We are not sure that people can really say what they think. Again, because they went through a lot, and you should not expect it. That, and that's why I'm not that optimistic. And actually my presentation is about that we should not be optimistic about that's all in the past. Okay, these old guys are in the past, but it doesn't mean that we may relax. And Natalie, to your question, which is very much close to this, I hope. May I have my presentation again, because I have the special table for this. Meanwhile, Tom, yeah, the same presentation I had, yes. So that's. So, Natalie, that's the answer to your question. That's the difference between these old guys and new guys. So that they will address this the same sentiment, but in very different methods. So this old school, they addressed mostly older people, and these new actors, they will. Yeah, that. No. That may be old people who reinvent themselves. That may be that old industrial money that will put it in some new political project, invest in some political project. We don't know the faces, yes. We don't know the avatar, but we could imagine the arguments, we could imagine the agenda. So these old guys, they changed brands, you know, from communist to Party of Region to Social Democrat, so the titles didn't matter. But what these new guys do, they adapt their ideas all the time. And I think I have something to do about Soviet Union, because Tom mentioned Soviet Union nostalgia. That's a very interesting question, because again, these old guys, they're addressing the past. They're addressing nostalgia, paternalism, social welfare, some stability you had in the Soviet Union. These new guys, they say, okay, we should appreciate that. We should claim for that, because Soviet Union was not only Russian. We created that. We created this great. First, we created Russian Empire. We means Ukrainians, which is not particularly incorrect. That's true. Unfortunately, that's true. We created that monster, but that's another long story. So, and that Ukrainians were at the beginning of Soviet Union, and they made substantial input. So, their message is we should claim that legacy. Soviet Union was not that bad, but they praise Soviet Union not for this stability, you know, ice cream and everything. They praise for their greatness. And that's what they are trying to sell. You know, okay, we don't have Russia anymore. Russia are not our friends, at least for the nearest future. So now we will be great. So we will be new Russia, so-called. We will replace this this niche. So what? Veronica, frustration with the European Union. That's what I mentioned, you know, because the hopes now are so high that the price for disappointment will also be very high. And sometimes that will be the genuine frustration, and sometimes that will be just heated feelings, because for some actors in Ukraine, there's new terms or any terms with European Union will not be beneficial. So maybe they will not be enthusiastic. So that's another difference between these old guys. They relied on Russia, and these new will rely on these failures and on frustration. And again, these old guys actually. Russia and Putin, they had them in their pocket. But the political future of these guys will depend on Brussels. Well, at this moment, as we speak, it just hoops. But it may change any moment. Piotr, Venice, Venice. I'm not really into this right now. I know there are very different opinions about that. There is room for compromise. There are no rooms for compromise. But in context of this presentation, actually, my point is that. In Ukraine now, we should not look into, in case of Russians, we should not look at them at the minority, because de facto Russians are not a minority. You know, these lines are elsewhere. That's why I'm talking about misinterpretation all the time. Russians are not a national minority in Ukraine in the way they are, for example, in Baltic countries. That's a completely different story. So, and as far as I know, Venice Commission has concerns mostly about Hungarian minority, which again is a very different story from Russian. And about this church. Well, okay, church is it would be too much to include it there. So they omitted it. Well, first of all. It's in case of Moscow Patriarchy, we are dealing not exactly with church. We are dealing partly with paramilitary organization with all consequences. Well, it's almost, which has a lot of power before and impunity. For example, they could put like thousands of people without masks in the middle of COVID. No one can do anything. So that's basically, that's not about religious conviction, you know, that's mostly about belonging to certain group with power, which is very, very important. And about about this contradiction result in March 1999 and in December 1999 during a referendum. First thing is, I already mentioned, is coup in Moscow. But another thing which played the role is the promotion, it's quite a funny story, promotion of the Deutsche Bank analysis about future of Soviet republics, among them Ukraine. So the Deutsche Bank just, you can look at this paper, what they did, they just count everything that the assets, the resources every Soviet republic had, and they concluded that Ukraine has the best perspective. Ukraine has 46% of overall Soviet Union agriculture output. So, and these very, very optimistic results, what was put on the leaflets and dismantled, it was everywhere. So that was one of the factors why people had so much hopes for Ukrainian independence, because they truly believe that we will be better on terms of economics, in terms of their incomes in Ukraine, because we would not share all our output with other Soviet republics. So that was actually a pragmatic side of it. It was done in 1990, before Soviet Union collapsed, and it was published in 1991. And Ruch, the democratic movement in Ukraine back then, they use it to persuade people that we need independence.
Thank you so much for that brilliant presentation, and sorry to Ivan that we ran over, but I think it was worth it. And thank you very much to the panel.